Welcome to the Best Minds in Association podcast from the Colorado Society of Association Executives. I am Tyrone Adams, your president for CSAE this year. For today's podcast, I will have a conversation with the sensational Amy McDermott. She is an experienced executive director for the Colorado Association of Realtors Foundation, and she's been with us for about a little bit over a year now.
Just over a year.
Right?
Yep.
Wow. Okay. So Amy, to kick this off, why don't you just tell us a little bit about you, your journey here, and then also about the CAR Foundation.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I always like to start off by telling everyone that I am a Colorado native, so I am very passionate about helping Colorado communities. It was an amazing place to grow up. It certainly changed a lot, and we have such fantastic people all over the state that it really has always been I feel like an honor and a privilege to be a Coloradan, and now it's an honor and a privilege to get to give back to Colorado. So that's really kind of how my journey into philanthropy came about, is from having a fantastic childhood growing up in Colorado and wanting to be a part of making my own community better. And I am now at the point where I have been involved in working with nonprofits and philanthropic organizations for about 20 years, everything from communications and marketing to community outreach to formal impact evaluations, board management, executive level fundraising roles, and then all of the nuts and bolts stuff like operations and finance. So you name it, I have pretty much done it when it comes to nonprofits. And so that gives me kind of a well-rounded perspective when it comes to something like the CAR Foundation, which shares a lot of my own passions. It's all about helping Coloradans all over the state. They've been around a little longer than I have in terms of working in nonprofits. We're in our 31st year of operations for the CAR Foundation. And it was originally founded really as a way for realtors to give back to their communities in an organized fashion to help Coloradans achieve safe and affordable housing. They called it back then. Now we call it attainable housing, because of course, everyone's definition of affordable is unique to them. So really it's about housing that is safe and attainable for Coloradans. That's how it started. And then a little later on, they added an education component where they would also help support organizations that were providing home buyer education and financial education to Coloradans. And then ultimately, those two missions came together with the mission of providing housing-related disaster relief to become what we now know as the CAR Foundation. And those are the three parts of our mission. And so we fund organizations all over the state through grants to nonprofits. And then, of course, during times of disaster, we're able to help individuals with mortgage and rental relief and things like that. And what I think is really amazing about what the CAR Foundation has done is that it truly does help all communities across the state. There's truly not a region or a part of the state that hasn't been touched by this foundation's work over the years.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's been very impactful, and I know it's been very impactful, but for the audience's sake, I mean, tell us about the impact that it's had on Colorado communities.
Well, in 31 years, the foundation has invested about $8.2 million in Colorado communities through grants. And what that looks like is tens of thousands of Coloradans' lives that have been touched by this funding over the years as a result of the services provided by all of these different nonprofits that have been helped through this funding.
Wow, that's a lot of money. And I know our goal is to get to 10 million real soon. But how do we come up with that type of money? I mean, it's not like our association has $10 million sitting in its reserves to say, here, go give it to the communities. So
and if we did, I'd like to hear about it, because I think I could find a way to use that. No, over the years, the foundation has utilized a number of different fundraising methods, all of which are, I think, could really be approachable for other associations that might look to want to do something philanthropic. There are a number of different ways, certainly, to fundraise. We see them all the time. There are digital marketing fundraising, there's event fundraising. Sometimes you see sponsorships available and people raising money for things like 5K runs or golf tournaments. So we're out there getting involved with the community, getting people involved. And so we call that fundraising and friend raising, right? Because we're gaining supporters along with the funds. And one of the most impactful ways that the Carr Foundation has fundraised over the years has been actually through donations from real estate buyers and sellers who agreed to donate the interest that accrues on their escrow fund. So, when you go to buy a house, you put down an amount of money and earnest funds, right? To as a good faith gesture that we're going to buy this house, and those funds are then placed in an escrow account for the remainder of the transaction. Well, that account earns a little bit of interest. Sometimes it earns a little more interest than others, depending on what rates are. And that interest really belongs sort of to no one. And so buyers and sellers in Colorado can elect to donate that interest to the Carr Foundation, which is one of the ways that the foundation fundraised most prolifically in the past. And now we have moved along to, in addition to that, we've diversified into some of those other event type fundraising and fundraising auctions, email marketing type fundraising, and really being able to reach kind of the individual donors and association members across the state, but then also to bring in some industry and corporate partners. That's a great way to engage the other businesses that you may work with as an association. There's sponsorship opportunities for them. There's marketing opportunities for them. And that's kind of what's in it for those industry partners. And that's really those are the situations that we call a win-win. They get some really great marketing out of it. We get some contributions to the foundation. You really start to develop a partnership.
Yeah, and I know that when I give to charitable organizations, I always get the email back saying thank you, but does your company do a matching gift?
Right.
And why does Carr Foundation do that, or is that something that you guys are going to look into?
That is something that we're going to continue to look into. You see that a lot when you're fundraising and your donors may work at a company that offers matching gifts. A lot of times that's a really great way for employers to provide a little bit of a benefit to their employees while also, of course, getting a tax benefit of their own, right? So that's another win-win. And so when donors that work for those companies donate to a nonprofit or a charity, we can then go back and ask the company they work for to kick in those matching funds. And there's some research out there about the tens of millions of dollars that are kind of left on the table across the country every year by people who don't go out and look for those matching funds. So I would say if you work for a company that may have that type of a benefit, it's worth looking into because you could be doubling your donation to the nonprofit that you choose to invest in.
Oh, that's awesome. So you've been giving out a whole lot of money. Let's go back to the impact of this foundation. Give us the best impact or the best example of the impact that this foundation has made to date that since you've been around for this foundation.
Absolutely. Let me tell you one of my favorite stories. So it's really easy to think of a funding organization because we're not social workers, we're not case managers, we're not out there in the community necessarily providing the direct services. Our role is to fund those organizations that are out there providing those direct services. And it's a very important role, even though sometimes it may not feel quite as hands-on as if we were the ones out there, handing out the bottles of water or handing out case management and helping connect people to resources. But our role as a funder is equally important because without funders, obviously those other service delivery organizations can't do their jobs. They can't go out there and make those connections happen and help those people. So one of my favorite stories in the time that I've been here is about a Colorado teenager, a Denver metro area teenager named Devon. And Devon is not your average teenager. He has cystic fibrosis, which means that he has a hard time moving around sometimes. So he's wheelchair bound and he lives with his mom and his younger brother in a house that has steps leading up to their front door. And for the longest time, whenever his family wanted to leave the house and Devon wanted to go with them, his mom and his brother had to pick up his wheelchair on either side and carry him down the stairs and then carry him back up when they were coming back in the house. And so similarly, inside their house, they couldn't get him in and out of the shower very easily. They had to lift the whole wheelchair in and out because their house just had not been set up to be accessible for his wheelchair. And because through a grant from the Carr Foundation to an organization that works with volunteers to help provide modifications and repairs to homes where the residents might be living with disabilities or perhaps even aging in place. That's the mission of this organization. The Carr Foundation gave them a grant. Through that grant, they were able to round up a crew of volunteers, round up all of the materials, and manage a construction project to build a ramp at Devon's house, and also to renovate their family's bathroom to make it ADA accessible so that he could roll in there with his wheelchair, get in the shower easily when he needed to without having to have a lot of help. And as a result of that construction project, his family is living in their house in a way that makes their everyday lives easier. And so while that may seem like maybe kind of a small thing, for that family, that's a huge thing. This is impacting their lives in a positive way every single day, all day long, from now, as long as they live in that house. And that's the kind of impact that these types of funds can have.
Wow, that is awesome, and that's very impactful. And so, with the benefits of what the Carr Foundation does, and we know this has been in existence since 1990, I believe. So, tell me, why don't more associations have foundations like this as part of their value proposition?
I think more associations should have foundations like this as part of the value proposition. I think there are a number of great reasons why they should. And I think perhaps some of the reasons why they don't is there's a little bit of a barrier to entry, right? You might think that you need to file all the paperwork and set up a 501c3, which is, of course, the tax code for a charitable enterprise through the IRS, so that you can then offer tax deductible benefits to your donors and many other things like that. And that does require some significant administration. It has both some benefits and some limitations, of course. Obviously, some of the benefits being that your donors can donate and get a tax deduction. Some of the limitations being that it does take some administration, because there are record keeping requirements. There are legal requirements that have to be kind of part of that. And for the longest time, there were not a lot of ways around that, right? Like, you could, as an entity, fundraise or collect, let's say, backpacks at the beginning of the school year, or physical donation items up to a certain point. But once you kind of go beyond a certain threshold, you start limiting your potential for fundraising, because truly donors are savvy and they want that tax deduction. And when you start to look at corporate donors or business donors, or slightly bigger gifts with which you could have more impact, those donors, they want to have that tax deduction. So you start to have this kind of a ceiling. And it did not used to be that there were a lot of options kind of beyond that. Now we have options like using a fiscal sponsor, which is something the Carr Foundation does, where we help other organizations to utilize a charitable fund that works under our 501c3 and allows them to offer their donors that tax deductible benefit, and we handle the administration of it, and they just get to handle kind of the fun part, the impact part. And so that's become much more common in philanthropy now than ever before. And so that's a really great reason to start to look into that. But I mean, I think associations can really benefit from having a philanthropic avenue for their members. I mean, obviously deepens the commitment and the connection to the community. You're engaging your members in doing good and giving back in the community. I think associations can have stronger member engagement overall, because we're encouraging members to work together for a common mission, for a common goal. Right. And we're offering more opportunities for them to get together. And then, also it can increase the visibility and the brand recognition of the association as a whole too, because you truly are out there in the community and people take notice of that. And it's a marketing opportunity as well for the association.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I do think that if an association cannot take advantage of a foundation or create a foundation, then they should look at other avenues to do that. And I think you did just talk about the difference between a 501c3 and a foundation. And, that's something that I didn't know about even as we sit here today, but we were listening to you like, wow, a lot of people don't know the difference. Mm-hmm. So let's shift to you a little bit. What are some of the causes you like to give to and why?
That's a good question. One of the causes I'm most passionate about is organizations that serve kids, K-12 kids, so kindergarten through 12th grade kids, particularly through different education type organizations. That's something that I am really passionate about, having done some work in education foundations in the past. And then as a military spouse, I am also really passionate about helping military families. So that can look anything from helping organizations that serve veterans with PTSD and work on reintegrating them into society. But also I'm very passionate about military spouse employment. And there are some really great organizations out there that are working along those lines. We learn things like the military spouse unemployment rate has a tendency to be more than 4 or 5 times the national average. And so these are, there's always something else to learn about when it comes to philanthropy and doing good. And I think that kind of illustrates the fact that no matter what you're interested in or what you're passionate about, whether it's animal rescue or, protecting the great lands of the American West, here we are in Colorado, right? There's always an organization that's out there doing great work around all of those different interests and passions. You can always find a way to do some good.
Yeah, and that's great. But we also know that we have people out there that want to scam artists. Mm-hmm. How do we know organizations legit versus the scam artists? What can we look for?
That's a great question. If you are looking to donate or even to volunteer your time, you should always do a little bit of research on the organization that you are thinking of donating to or volunteering with. And there are a couple of really great ways to do that. You can look the organization up on charitynavigator.org, which is one of the biggest clearinghouses for nonprofits. They have a rating system, so they rate the financial health of the organization, the administrative health of the organization. This is how we, learn about some of those nonprofits where their CEOs are making $500,000 a year, and a lot of your donation dollars go into administration. And while certainly some of those donation dollars need to go into administration because you got to keep the lights on and you got to pay your people, but we want to see a balance, right? And so that Charity Navigator is one, GuideStar is another one where you can actually search the organization that you're interested in donating to, and you can read about how they spend their money, how they work within the IRS guidelines and things like that to make sure that everything is on the up and up, because you want to make sure that your funds are going where they're going to actually do some good. And when you're giving your time, you want to make sure that it's really going where it needs to go, right?
Right. Is there an acceptable ratio that people should look to balance?
That is a really excellent question. Actually, historically, you would always see the most successful fundraising organizations would sort of brag about having like a 90-10 type of a ratio, 90% of their dollars going to impact, 10% going to administration. We're seeing that start to move a little bit in what I think is a much more practical way. And really now anything above 75 or 80% mission ratio, and say 15 to 20%, even 25% administrative and fundraising ratio is perfectly reasonable. As we all know, costs for everything go up. Costs for these organizations to provide their services have gone up over the years. And of course, we want these nonprofits to be able to maintain and their staffing levels and retain the really talented people that are out there providing the services, right? And so in order to do that, there has to be some staffing costs. There has to be some administrative costs. And so I think anything over 75% mission ratio, you should consider is a good organization, and you should feel comfortable with donating your money to them.
Yeah. If someone hires someone just because they want to keep them, you get what you pay for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
What other pitfalls do these organizations, startup organizations, fall into?
Well, certainly there are a lot of
mistakes do they make?
Oh, absolutely. Certainly there are a lot of upfront costs when it comes to starting up a nonprofit organization. And I always say that it's never your mission that's going to be the downfall of your organization, right? We always have, you see these organizations starting up with incredible missions. They have these visions of really doing amazing work and helping their specific, target demographic of whoever it is they're helping. Maybe it's wild Mustangs, maybe it's homeless people, maybe it's school children, whatever it is. The mission is never the problem. The operations are the problem, right? The operations are what ultimately sometimes sink these organizations. So you want these organizations to have solid operational procedures in place, which means solid financial procedures in place. You want to see them have a relatively low turnover of employees, because that means that they're treating their people well and that they've got, policies and procedures in place that are making this a good place to work. And then that gets translated out into the services they're providing to the community. So really knowing a little bit about the operations of these nonprofits is a way to gauge the health of their organizations.
Awesome. Well, Amy, we're about to come to a close. One last question.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we should know about that I didn't ask you about when it comes to philanthropy and creating a foundation or maintaining your foundation?
I think the most important takeaway is that there's always a way for all of us to do some good. And when it comes to the association world, I think there are a number of benefits to members. There are a number of benefits to the association as a whole. And certainly there are a number of benefits to the community that our associations work within, to think about starting a philanthropic endeavor. It's a way to engage your members. It's a way to get out there in the community and do some good. It's a way to really capitalize on sort of the passions of your members and what they might be interested in helping in a way that raises the profile of what they're doing and what the association is doing. And that means that everybody wins.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, Amy, thank you so much. This information is very useful. And I know that we have a lot of associations out there that are thinking about, creating their own 501c3 or their foundation. And hopefully this will help them on their journey in creating something very useful for the community. Well, that's it, folks. Thank you guys for joining the CSAE podcast. And we hope this information was enlightening for you. And until next time, you take care of yourselves.